It feels like an absolute lifetime since we got a weapon unlock in Tides of War, and I suppose in gaming terms that's because it kind of was a lifetime ago. For the past 7 weeks, the Tides of War unlock has been either a cosmetic item or a knife. You have to go back all the way to week 3 of Tides of War to find the last weekly weapon, and that was the Carabin 1938M. At least this week we finally have a new weapon to unlock and play around with in the form of the PanzerBOOSH 39. I don't know how to pronounce PanzerBOOSH. It might be PanzerBOOSH, it might be PanzerBOOSH, but I'm just going to go with PanzerBOOSH because I think that sounds cool. Now, you may be forgiven for thinking that it looks a lot like the Boys AT rifle, and that's because it does perform similarly. This is the second anti-material rifle to be added to the game, and it sits in the Recon class. For anyone who isn't clued up, the anti-material category was added back in the 3rd chapter of Tides of War Trial by Fire. Anti-material rifles have some limitations, but also a lot of strengths. They can damage vehicles for one, so they're kind of similar to the K-bullets from BF1, or more so the Tank Hunter kit, I'd say. And much like the Tank Hunter, you can't just run around and aim down the sight with these weapons willy-nilly, as they do adopt the same approach currently as medium machine guns, so you need to be either utilising the bipod on cover or be prone to get the scope up on the gun. You can, however, hip-fire it depending on the range, and it can be quite accurate at times. Stats-wise, it's also quite similar to the Boys AT rifle. I mean, after all, they are powerful single-shot rifles, so they're quite close in that respect. The Boys does have a slightly faster rate of fire though, even when both rifles have the faster firing cycle rate specification equipped. But the PanzerBOOSH has a really cool reload, and while it still might not be as quick as the Boys AT rifle, it looks damn good doing it. There's a round holder on the right hand side of the gun that can store rounds, and it makes for a really nice reload animation. In reality, this is not a system that feeds the gun, it's simply a holder that allowed the gunner easier access to rounds and to reload faster. The PanzerBOOSH was a German developed anti-tank rifle, and anti-tank rifles in general were mainly created as a response to the appearance of British tanks on the Western Front. There was a need for a man-portable anti-tank rifle, and the first iteration of the PanzerBOOSH was called the PanzerBOOSH 38, and in real life the shooting mechanism was actually prone to jamming as it got really dirty in the field. Thankfully, you don't have to worry about that in the digital space though. And then the PanzerBOOSH 39 came along with essentially the same performance as the 38, but it came equipped with 2 cases each containing up to 10 rounds that could be attached to the side of the weapon. As I mentioned earlier, that was to give the gunner quicker access to the rounds when they needed them. Around 500 of these rifles were used by the German army in the invasion of Poland, and then 2 years later, at the beginning of the war against the USSR, around 25,000 were used by German troops. By 1944, the rifle had become almost useless though against anything other than the lightest of armoured vehicles, which is somewhat how it is in the game too. The Panzer can deal damage to tanks, but you're only picking them off very slowly, so depending on the angle and where you hit the tank, you could be doing only a few points of damage each time, but hit them in the right place at the right angle, and if you've got the ACPR, which is the armor piercing bullet specialization equipped, then you could be doing considerably more. So this gun is significantly better against light armoured vehicles. Some well-placed shots are going to deal some serious damage to those. The reality is that you can still be a threat against tanks with it, and if nothing else, you are stopping them from repairing, and when combined with an assault player, you could still be a real menace with this thing. Of course, where the fun comes with guns like these though is just running around and landing shots on infantry. When the Boys AT rifle came out, you probably noticed a big influx of players using it and you getting one hit killed with it because, let's face it, it's fun. It takes some getting used to, mind, and you have to change up the way that you play, much like you do with the medium machine guns, but when you land those shots, especially if they're hip-fire shots, it's so satisfying. It's basically a meme generator. I still don't see most players using it as their go-to weapon though. I know a lot of people will say maybe it's overpowered, but once players have unlocked it and then messed around with it for a week or two, I think most will head back to their preferred sniper rifles of choice, the bolt actions, and only a select few players will play with these sorts of guns regularly. Saying that though, as I mentioned back in my Boys AT rifle video, I simply don't agree with a sniper rifle in a Battlefield game that can one-shot people to the chest, but that's just my preference. Now, when it comes to the specializations, I opted here to go full left-hand side, much like I did with the Boys AT rifle, and incidentally, the specializations are identical for both of these guns. Swings and swivels gives you faster shooting after sprinting, which only really helps if you need to hip-fire someone really fast. Flashless repellent reduces your muzzle flash to make you harder to see, and then machined bolt cycles the gun faster, and finally you've got armor piercing bullets that increase damage against vehicles. The right hand path does offer less recoil, variable zooming, quicker reloads, and high velocity bullets, which could be a good alternative if you're only planning to use the gun against infantry. Now, this week's Tides of War assignment isn't all that difficult, to be honest. You first need to get 1000 objective score, and then you just need to pick a path that involves either killing players, reviving and resupplying them with ammo, although you do need 5000 resupply points, which I think is a lot, especially when considering that every other player is dropping ammo crates around. The final stage, though, is to get 10 of either the smoke barrage or the sector artillery as a squad. Not hard, but quite time consuming depending on how good your squad and squad leader are. Now, as well as the new weapon this week, there's another addition to the game that a lot of players are absolutely going to love and others hate: the return of Grind and Fortress. If you head to the multiplayer menu, there's a Combat Under Pressure playlist that offers you Grind and Fortress, so you can get your close range hectic fix if that's your thing. I can see the appeal of Grind, but really it's not for me most of the time, but it is really good at grinding the Tides of War assignments. Revives as a squad score, or just getting kills are pretty easy when there's so much going on in front of you. So we may have waited 7 weeks for a new gun in the weekly Tides of War assignments, but much like with buses, 2 are now coming along in quick succession, and the next assignment for Tides of War will be the unlock of the Breda M1936 PG, which is a cool assault rifle, a burst rifle in fact. If anyone saw my footage of the new Battlefield maps from Gamescom, you would have seen the Panzer and the Breda already, as they were unlocked at the time. The Breda is particularly an interesting gun because in burst fire, perhaps it isn't all that strong because the bursts have quite a lengthy delay between them when compared to some of the other faster firing guns in the game, but I found that on single fire it was really strong. So it's good to see more weapons coming to the game after a long period without anything fresh, but even though the Panzer is a new gun, it doesn't feel all that fresh to me, as it's almost exactly the same thing as the Boys AT rifle that came out a few months ago. It's a new gun, of course, it looks different, but the nature of it means that it doesn't really feel that unique. It's quite hard to make weapons feel unique, I think, from this time period, though. We are heading into an important time for BF5 at the moment. We need more weapons, more vehicles, new maps, and hopefully the next patch will offer up at least some of that with the new Operation Underground map. It looks though that we're probably going to have to wait until the Pacific launches to see a big influx of new vehicles and maps, and fingers crossed new weapons too. The good news though is that this week's patch, as I can tell, hasn't caused any major issues, and I know that that doesn't sound that exciting, but considering the recent patches in the game, I think that's a step forward. If you follow the Battlefield community, you'll know that over the past maybe 6 to 8 weeks or so, the general sentiment in the community has been really negative. It's not been good. But since the latest patch and people being able to play it for a week or so, I've seen a bit of praise and more positivity in the community. It feels like 4.4 was a good step in the right direction, and there's not really that many bugs going on as far as I can tell. If you look on Reddit, on the forums, it's mostly people saying, hey, this is pretty good, rather than everything's broken, let's burn it all down. So I think in general that's a really good thing, and I'm glad that DICE are looking like they're on the right path. This chapter of Tides of War ends after the next gun releases, and then it's on to future chapters and hopefully lots of new content for us to get our hands on. I want to see something a bit spicier from the next Tides of War, and I'd like to see DICE surprise us a bit. With that said, that's all for today, guys. If you've unlocked the gun, do let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments below. A big thank you to you guys for watching this. Thank you so much. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Subscribe for more. Hit that bell for all notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.